Billionaire laughed at Black Waitress's old shoes. Her next sentence made the whole restaurant go silent. What if I told you that sometimes the most powerful words come from the quietest voices, and that dignity can shine brightest when someone tries to dim it? On a chilly Tuesday evening at Marcel's, one of the city's most exclusive restaurants, 42-year-old tech billionaire Richard Caldwell sat at his usual corner table, scrolling through his phone while waiting for his business associates. The soft jazz music mixed with the gentle clinking of expensive silverware created the perfect backdrop for deals worth millions. 36-year-old Jasmine walked carefully between tables, her worn sneakers silent against the polished marble floor. She'd been working double shifts for 3 months now, every tip precious, every smile genuine despite the exhaustion that settled deep in her bones. Her shoes had seen better days, but they were comfortable, reliable, and all she could afford right now. She had no idea that in the next few minutes, her quiet strength would teach everyone in that restaurant a lesson they'd never forget. Where are you watching from tonight? Jasmine had been working at Marcel's for 8 months, and she genuinely loved her job despite the challenges. The other servers had welcomed her warmly, and most customers treated her with respect. She took pride in remembering their favorite orders, checking on elderly diners who ate alone, and making sure every guest felt cared for. Her manager, Mrs. Patterson, often praised her dedication and warm personality. Tonight felt different, though. Richard Caldwell had been making snide comments to his server all evening, sending back perfectly prepared dishes and complaining about everything from the temperature of his water to the volume of the background music. When his regular server called in sick, Jasmine volunteered to take over his table, hoping her patient nature might improve the situation. "Excuse me, Mr. Caldwell," she said softly, approaching his table with a fresh glass of wine. "Is there anything else I can bring you this evening?" Richard looked up from his phone, his eyes immediately traveling down to her feet. A smirk crossed his face as he noticed her old sneakers, worn at the edges with a small scuff mark near the left toe. They were clean but clearly had been through many long shifts. "Those are interesting shoes for a place like this," he said, his voice carrying just loud enough for nearby tables to hear. "I suppose not everyone can afford proper footwear for fine dining establishments." The restaurant seemed to grow quieter. Other diners glanced over, some looking uncomfortable, others waiting to see how the interaction would unfold. Jasmine felt heat rise in her cheeks, but she maintained her composure, clasping her hands together in front of her. "They're comfortable for long shifts," she replied quietly, her voice steady despite the embarrassment. "Is there anything else you need with your meal?" Richard leaned back in his chair, clearly enjoying the attention his comment had drawn. He was known in these circles for his sharp tongue and cutting remarks, often using his wealth and status to make others feel small. Tonight, he seemed particularly inclined to flex his superiority. "Comfortable, I'm sure," he continued, his tone dripping with condescension. "Though I imagine if you worked a little harder, saved a little more, you might be able to afford shoes that actually match this restaurant's standards. Perhaps something that doesn't look like it came from a discount store." The neighboring tables fell completely silent now. An elderly couple stopped eating, looking distressed by the exchange. A family with teenage children watched with wide eyes, the parents clearly uncomfortable with the cruelty they were witnessing. Jasmine stood there for a moment, absorbing his words. She could feel dozens of eyes on her, waiting to see if she would break, argue back, or simply walk away in shame. Her heart pounded, and she felt that familiar sting of being judged for things beyond her immediate control. But instead of retreating, something shifted in her expression. A quiet strength seemed to settle over her shoulders like a warm shawl. She looked directly at Richard, her dark eyes meeting his with unexpected steadiness. "You're absolutely right about these shoes," she said, her voice clear and calm, carrying across the now silent restaurant. "They are old, and they are worn." Richard's smirk widened, expecting her to apologize or make excuses. He glanced around the restaurant, enjoying his audience, ready to deliver another cutting remark that would cement his dominance in this exchange. But Jasmine wasn't finished. "These shoes walked me through nursing school," she continued, her voice growing stronger with each word. "They stood with me through 14-hour shifts at the Children's Hospital when I was paying my way through college. They carried me to my mother's bedside every day for 6 months while she fought cancer. The restaurant had become so quiet that only the soft jazz continued playing, creating an almost sacred atmosphere around her words. Richard's expression began to change, the smugness slowly fading as he realized this wasn't going where he'd expected. They walked me through my daughter's first day of kindergarten when I was a single mother working 2 jobs, Jasmine said, her eyes never leaving his face. They stood strong when I had to choose between buying new shoes for myself or school supplies for her. They've walked me through food banks when money was tight, through job interviews when I was trying to build a better life. An elderly woman at a nearby table placed her hand over her heart, clearly moved by Jasmine's words. The businessman who'd been eating alone stopped pretending to check his emails and was listening intently. These shoes have danced at my daughter's school performances, walked me across the stage when I graduated with my nursing degree, and carried me to this job that I'm grateful for every single day, Jasmine continued, her voice unwavering. They've walked through grief, through joy, through struggle, and through hope. Richard shifted uncomfortably in his chair, his phone forgotten on the table. The power dynamic in the room had completely flipped, and he seemed to realize he was no longer the one in control of this conversation. Every scuff mark tells a story of perseverance, Jasmine said softly. Every worn spot represents a step forward, even when moving forward was the hardest thing to do. These shoes have never let me down, never given up on me, never made me feel ashamed of where I've been or where I'm going.
Is there anything else I can
She
get
paused for a moment, letting her words settle in the silence before delivering the sentence that would echo through that restaurant long after the evening ended. So yes, sir, these are old shoes. But they belong to a woman who has never been afraid of honest work, who has never looked down on others for their struggles, and who knows the difference between the price of something and its true value. The silence that followed was profound. Every person in that dining room sat frozen, some with forks halfway to their mouths, others leaning forward as if they were witnessing something sacred. The elderly couple exchanged meaningful glances, and the family's teenage daughter wiped tears from her eyes. If this moment has touched your heart, please give the video a thumbs up. Richard stared at Jasmine, his mouth slightly open, clearly struggling to process what had just happened. His attempt to humiliate her had instead revealed the depth of her character and exposed the poverty of his own spirit. The woman he'd tried to diminish stood before him with a dignity he suddenly realized his money could never buy. The weight of Jasmine's words hung in the air like a gentle but firm correction to the universe's temporary imbalance. Richard found himself unable to speak, his usual quick wit and sharp tongue completely silenced by the unexpected grace and strength of this woman he had tried to humiliate. For the first time in years, Richard felt small, not because of someone else's cruelty, but because of his own. He looked around the restaurant and saw the faces of the other diners, disappointment, admiration for Jasmine, and something that looked uncomfortably like pity for him. These were his peers, his social circle, and they were seeing a side of him that he'd never meant to reveal so starkly. He started, then stopped, realizing that any attempt at justification would only dig his hole deeper. Jasmine stood quietly, waiting. She wasn't gloating or pressing her advantage. She had simply spoken her truth and was prepared to move forward with whatever came next. Her hands remained steady, her posture dignified, her expression calm but alert. Mrs. Patterson, the restaurant manager, had been watching from across the room. She approached the table slowly, her face serious but not unkind. "Is everything all right here?" she asked, her tone professional but protective of her employee. "Everything's fine," Jasmine said before Richard could respond. "I was just explaining the history of my shoes to Mr. Caldwell." The elderly gentleman from the nearby table stood up, his wife following. They walked over to where Jasmine stood, and the man extended his hand to her. "Miss, I want you to know that your words just reminded me of my own mother," he said, his voice slightly shaky with emotion. "She worked 3 jobs to put food on our table, and she always said that dignity wasn't something you could buy or sell, it was something you carried inside you." His wife nodded, tears glistening in her eyes. "Your mother raised you right, dear. Thank you for sharing your story." More diners began to approach. The family with the teenagers came over, the mother speaking softly to Jasmine about her own struggles as a young parent. The businessman who'd been dining alone shook her hand and quietly slipped her a generous tip, whispering, "Thank you for the reminder about what really matters." Richard watched this unfold with growing understanding of just how badly he'd miscalculated. These weren't people feeling sorry for Jasmine, they were honoring her. They recognized something in her story that resonated with their own experiences or their own values, something he'd been too blinded by privilege to see. As the other customers returned to their tables, the atmosphere in the restaurant had completely transformed. Conversations resumed, but they were softer, more thoughtful. People seemed to be looking at each other with more kindness, more awareness. Jasmine turned back to Richard, no triumph in her expression, just patient professionalism. "Would you like me to bring you anything else this evening, sir? Have you ever faced a moment that changed how you see the world? Let us know in the comments." Richard looked at her face, really looked at it for the first time. He saw intelligence, compassion, strength, and something else he hadn't expected, forgiveness. She wasn't holding on to anger or resentment. She had simply defended her dignity, and was ready to continue serving him with the same courtesy she'd shown before. Richard sat in silence for what felt like an eternity, though it was probably only 30 seconds. The restaurant had returned to its normal sounds, but something fundamental had shifted in the atmosphere, and in him. He looked down at his own expensive Italian leather shoes, then back up at Jasmine's worn sneakers, and for the first time, he understood which pair carried more honor. "Miss," he said finally, his voice much quieter than before. "I owe you an apology. What I said was cruel and completely unacceptable." Jasmine nodded slightly, acknowledging his words but not rushing to make him feel better about his behavior. She was giving him space to take full responsibility for his actions. "I was wrong," Richard continued, pushing aside his phone and giving her his complete attention. "I was wrong about your shoes, wrong about you, and wrong about what gives any of us value as human beings." The sincerity in his voice was unmistakable. This wasn't the polished, calculated charm he used in boardrooms or social gatherings. This was raw honesty, probably the most genuine words he'd spoken in months. "Your shoes have walked a path I couldn't imagine," he said, his voice growing stronger as he found his footing in this unfamiliar territory of vulnerability. "And I have no right to judge anyone's journey, especially not someone who has shown the kind of strength and grace that you've demonstrated tonight." Jasmine's expression softened slightly, though she remained professionally composed. "Thank you for saying that, Mr. Caldwell. I appreciate your apology." But Richard wasn't finished. Something about this moment, about her dignity in the face of his cruelty, had unlocked a part of himself he'd forgotten existed. "Would you mind if I asked you a question?" he said. "Earlier, you mentioned nursing school and the children's hospital. Do you still work there?" "I do," Jasmine replied, a hint of warmth creeping into her voice for the first time since the exchange began. 3 days a week. I work here on the other days to help with my daughter's college fund." Richard nodded slowly, processing this information. "Your daughter, how old is she?" 17, Jasmine said, and for the first time, a genuine smile crossed her face. "She's a senior this year. Wants to study engineering. She's incredibly smart and works harder than anyone I know." "She learned that from you," Richard said simply, and the truth of that statement hung between them. At that moment, Mrs. Patterson approached the table again, this time carrying a small envelope. "Jasmine, this gentleman asked me to give you this," she said, indicating the elderly man who had spoken to her earlier. Jasmine opened the envelope to find a note and what appeared to be money. She read the note silently, her eyes widening, then looked around to find the elderly couple, but they had already left. "What does it say?" Mrs. Patterson asked gently. "It says, 'For your daughter's college fund.' From two people who understand the value of strong shoes and a stronger character. May she walk as proudly as her mother," Jasmine read aloud, her voice catching slightly. If you've been enjoying this story, please subscribe to our channel for more heartwarming tales. Richard watched her face as she processed this unexpected kindness, and something clicked into place for him, a decision that would change the course of the evening. Richard reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out his business card, but instead of handing it to Jasmine immediately, he took out a pen and wrote something on the back. Then he looked up at her with an expression that was completely different from the arrogant smirk he'd worn an hour earlier. "Jasmine," he said, using her name for the first time, "I want to make this right, but not in a way that would make you uncomfortable or feel like charity. I run a tech company, and we've been looking for someone to head up our employee wellness program. It would involve working with our healthcare benefits team, but also developing programs that support working parents and employees facing personal challenges." He handed her the card. "The job would use your nursing background and your understanding of what real people face in their daily lives. It would pay more than nursing and waitressing combined, include full healthcare, and offer tuition assistance for employees' children." Jasmine looked at the card, then back at him, her eyes searching his face for any sign that this was some elaborate joke or power play. "Mr. Caldwell, I don't understand. Tonight you taught me something I'd forgotten," Richard said earnestly. "You reminded me that real value comes from character, from perseverance, from treating others with dignity regardless of circumstances. Our company needs someone who understands those principles, someone who's lived them." Tears gathered in Jasmine's eyes, but she blinked them back. "I would need to give my notice here, and at the hospital." "Of course," Richard said quickly. "And if you're interested, I'd like you to take some time to think about it. Talk to your daughter, consider whether it's right for your family. There's no pressure." Mrs. Patterson, who had been listening, squeezed Jasmine's shoulder. "This sounds like an amazing opportunity, honey. You'd make a wonderful advocate for employees." Richard stood up and extended his hand to Jasmine. "Thank you," he said as she shook it. "Thank you for reminding me who I want to be." As he gathered his things to leave, Richard paused at the elderly couple's empty table and left a substantial tip for their server. He stopped at the hostess stand and quietly spoke to Mrs. Patterson about covering the meals for everyone who had approached Jasmine that evening. 3 weeks later, Jasmine started her new position. Her first initiative was establishing a fund to help employees facing unexpected financial hardships. No questions asked, no judgments made. She kept a photo on her desk, her wearing her old sneakers on her last day at Marcel's, standing next to Mrs. Patterson and the rest of the serving staff who had become like family to her. The sneakers now sat in her closet, retired but treasured. Her daughter had gotten into engineering school with a full scholarship, inspired by her mother's example of grace under pressure. And Richard had learned to see people, really see them, instead of just their surface circumstances. Sometimes the most powerful transformations begin with the smallest acts of dignity. If you enjoyed this story, please remember to like this video, share your thoughts in the comments about a time when someone's quiet strength inspired you, and subscribe for more heartwarming stories. Thank you for taking this journey with us tonight.